All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everyone, I'm Susan Kaufman. I'm here for Attitude Magazine, and you're listening to the ADHD Experts audio. You may know that this is ADHD Awareness Month. We're hosting this special series of awareness webinars, of which this is the second, and the topic today is women in attention deficit disorder. If you ask an average person to describe someone with ADHD, it's pretty likely that they're going to describe a hyperactive 8-year-old boy bouncing around the classroom whose teachers are begging for help with his behavior. But the fact is that the highest rates of diagnosis in recent years are among adult women, a group that's really only, probably in the last, I don't know, Michele, 5 to 10 years has been discovered to have attention deficit disorder at the same rate as children and men in general, virtually. The special issues of diagnosis and treatment and symptoms for women with ADHD are the topic of our broadcast today. And our guest, Michele Novotni, PhD, is especially qualified to address this. She's been a practicing psychologist, leader in the field for over 30 years, the author of several classic books for adults, especially I recommend the aptly named What Does Everyone Else Know That I Don't Know on social skills. And she's the past president of ADA, the very wonderful organization for adults with attention deficit disorder. And in fact, it was thanks to her that 10 years ago, for the first time, ADHD awareness was recognized by the Congress of the United States. So Michele, welcome.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Michele is always a big hit. If you're among those who are in this webinar, you're fortunate because the registrations far outpace the number of seats that we have available. So let me turn it over to Michele. Just mention a few quick housekeeping items. Post your questions in the box. Michele's going to give a brief introduction and then take your questions. If you have problems hearing us, please dial in. It's not going to be, that's going to be the only solution because the internet connection is what drives the sound here. After the session, you'll find Michele's slides and the audio of his broadcast on the Attitude website, attitudemag.com/webinars. And in a week or so, you'll find a podcast version on iTunes in our ADHD Experts audio series. Check back on Attitude for more webinars weekly, and we have coming up the last of our ADHD awareness webinars with the ever-popular Dr. Dodson on the general issues of adults and ADHD. Michele, let me turn it over to you, and thank you again for being here.
Thanks, Susan. Good to be here. And I can't believe it's been 10 years. That's exciting.
It's pretty amazing, huh? Things have really changed.
All right, so what we're going to go over today is women with ADHD. I actually have been in this field long enough that I was in the field. I was one of the first people who said, adults can have ADHD too. When I started, adults couldn't have ADHD, and I kept on looking at the parents that were bringing their kids in, and it's like, you know what, they do too. So that was the original forefront a while ago. So now we know that adults have it, and so it looks like the next frontier seems to be women with ADHD because it can look different, and the expectations are different. So women are misdiagnosed, undertreated, underdiagnosed, and it can have some really profound consequences. So the goal is to help make people aware of how ADHD looks different so that if you do go to talk to a doctor or if you're talking to teachers about your kids, you can be in the know, because just like adults didn't used to have it, most people overlook a lot of women, and hopefully we can start to change that. And we're also going to talk about some strategies, because I don't like to just talk about problems. And so we'll talk about some ideas for starting to manage some of the challenges that may be a little unique for women. So other than that, let's go. So next slide, please. All right, so I came up with 5 reasons. And again, there's many more reasons than 5. But one of the biggest reasons would be that many girls and women have what's called the inattentive type of ADHD, which is what Susan talked about in the beginning. When you say ADHD, people think of the little bouncing kid, and I actually had one of those. He's now a big bouncing kid. He's 28. But my son was typical. He was jumping out of windows. He was.
Hey, Michele, can I just interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
It looks like the sound's been lost.
The sound's lost?
Let's see. It's back. Someone just posted it's back. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay.
Sound is not lost. Okay, okay. I can hear her
Good.
now. Yes.
Good.
So
Yeah,
good.
lost sound isn't good. All
No,
right,
not
so
good.
all right, so girls and women often have the inattentive ADHD, and this would be true too to some extent of the boys with inattentive ADHD. So inattentive ADHD folks are not jumping around. They're not causing trouble as much. They're sitting there, but their brains are hyperactive. Their brains are bouncing from topic to topic to topic, but they can physically be perfectly still. So the traditional stereotype that most people recognize throws some people off, and this type can get overlooked, and many girls and women have this type. So that's one issue. The second one is even if the girls or women are hyperactive, it often looks differently. So whereas my son was jumping off of chairs and tables and crawling under things, a hyperactive girl talks a lot, and they talk frequently, and they get in trouble for talking, or their movements will be more subtle. I had somebody who told me their daughter wasn't hyperactive at all because she wasn't jumping around like her son, but I watched the daughter and her foot never stopped, her hand never stopped. So again, it was more subtle, but the talking a lot is a real common symptom of hyperactivity and interrupting and things like that, but they don't often recognize that. And here's a biggie. Girls and women also usually get something extra on top of the ADHD, and it's usually the extra add-on that gets a lot of attention. Many girls and women internalize their emotions, and they get depressed, or they worry a lot trying to be perfect and trying to get everything right and trying to do everything themselves, so they tend to get anxious. And also a number have eating disorders as well. So if you get to the point where you're seeing someone, oftentimes they might go off on the eating disorder, the depression, or the anxiety and not pay attention to the more subtle inattentive ADHD that's underlying it. So, and also when women talk, they tend to often mention their feelings more. So they'll talk about they feel sad or they feel overwhelmed. They don't often present with I'm inattentive, I have difficulty paying attention to tasks. They'll jump to and how that makes them feel. So what the clinicians need to do is back up. So why do you feel that way? I had one person who said, you know, she was always worried that she was going to forget something, that she would forget her child or forget a pot on the stove. And, you know, so she presented as anxious. And so then I asked the next question as well, have you ever forgotten your child? And she went, yeah, a number of times. And then, you know, have you ever left something on your stove? And she said, yeah, a number of times. So, you know, all of a sudden by asking the next question, you know, all of a sudden then you're like, oh, so maybe let's look at the root cause and not the effect. Is that making sense to you, Susan?
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, yeah. It wasn't just worried about it. It was she was worried about it legitimately. So, yeah.
Yeah, but again, what happens is when you give a doctor, I'm worried about all sorts of things like this, the doctors then seize on the what they're worried about. Okay, next slide, please. Also, girls and women are better socialized than men or boys a lot of times. And so it's more uncommon to have a girl or a woman act out, not impossible by any means. But so again, if you're in a school setting, for instance, the boys are going to be more disruptive than the girls, and especially if you're inattentive, because you're not really bothering anybody if you're sitting there in your own head jumping all around. But if you're talking a lot or pushing or shoving and making noises, then you're going to get attention. And so that's why we're able to catch so many of the hyperactive people, is because they're disruptive, and the inattentive, quieter ones tend to not be. And finally, unfortunately, society tends to have some lower expectations sometimes for women in terms of what they're capable of or what they should do. So, you know, if you have a hard time reading through a manual, people will say, oh, well, you know, you're a woman, that's hard for you. Or if you're in math class and you're in 6th grade and you're having a difficulty with the details, they'll go, oh, well, you know, math is hard. So again, we've made a lot of gains in society in terms of what can be expected, but there's still that, oh, yeah, women are like that. Or I know, like, some people get called space cadets, you know, and it's like, oh, she's just ditzy, or oh, she's just a blonde, oh, she's just this. And they tend to dismiss a lot of the symptoms. And they have done research studies that I find to be quite interesting where they have a male name and a female name in the exact same situation. And unfortunately, even in this day, they tend to find that the male must significantly have a problem and the female's fine. So again, sex does make a difference. Okay, next slide. All right, so then we also have the difference of the challenges. And for women, society seems to have deemed that we're supposed to be a working professional, we're supposed to be a good friend, we're supposed to be a good mother, we're supposed to be a wonderful spouse and partner, and we're supposed to take care of all the social obligations of our family, and we're supposed to cook meals. I keep on thinking of the old Anjali commercial. It's where, you know, they bring home the bacon and fry it up in the pan, and then they put on this lovely evening gown because I'm a woman. You know, it's like, I don't know who did that and who thinks that. So again, there's these like superhuman roles that women are supposed to do. And then on top of that, women aren't supposed to ask for help. It's bad if you don't do it yourself. So again, I think if we look at expectations, you know, like a man isn't supposed to clean a house if he's home alone. Of course, he could use a cleaning service if he had the means. Or if his house was messy, it would be, oh, it's okay. But if a woman does it, oh, they're a bad housekeeper, they're a bad person, you know, and it just moralizes the whole thing. So society's expectations are a problem here, and the women's ideas that they have to be perfect and they have to do it all themselves just makes the addition of ADHD a living nightmare in many cases. So next slide, or did you have anything to add to that one, Susan?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think that the expectations are difficult for any woman, whether they have ADHD or not, and then you add ADHD on top of it, and it gets, you know, very tough. Yeah.
All right, I guess that's why there's so many people coming to this webinar.
Exactly. 800 and counting, right?
All right, so it's going to be critical that if you're a female or a woman diagnosed with ADHD, first to get help by actually walking your physician or walking your clinician through the fact that you probably have ADHD. I have a lot of people who, you know, take those online tests, the screeners, which are actually quite good, and bring that to the physician and say, you know, I scored pretty highly for ADHD. And they might laugh at you a bit. I also ask that people screen their physicians or their psychologists or social workers or whoever they go to make sure they treat adults with ADHD. Because if they don't treat adults with ADHD or they don't treat kids with ADHD, run and go find somebody who knows what they're doing, because every single thing you do is going to be fighting. And the last thing you need to do is have a doc or, you know, somebody on your side that doesn't get it, because there's growing numbers of people who get it. There's a lot of professionals. They advertise in, like, Attitude Magazine has a nice section, Chad has a nice one, Adam has one. So again, I think if you search around and somebody says they work with people with ADHD, that would be great. If you want to ask the next question, and, you know, do they work with women with ADHD, that would be great too. Because again, you're going to need to learn some specific strategies, and you're going to need somebody who knows what they're doing just to help you. I wish we had like Chiquita banana stickers for people who were good at this.
Well, I think that's going to change a lot in the years to come, but right now it's still tough to find someone who really knows what they're doing in this field. So.
Yep. So we got to work on that one. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about, can we back up one? Because I think this is the one for some of the strategies. I'll talk about a couple of the strategies. No, I guess that's the next slide. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, Stuart, go ahead. Next slide. So then when we talk about, in addition to all the other challenges that women have, women also have to deal with menopause or perimenopause. And Patricia Quinn has written profusely and laboriously over the years, you know, talking about the changing needs of women through different cycles. And that can even be for kids, you know, the closer girls get to their period cycles, their ADHD symptomatology can change. So some women or females even need to take additional medication a few days before, you know, or during different times of their cycle. So it's going to be important to also pay attention to fluctuating ADHD symptoms. And if you notice that your symptoms or your daughter's symptoms fluctuate at different times of the month, it would be really good to talk to, again, a doctor who knows what they're talking about, because some of the physicians do alter medication regimes if medication is, what's being used, or some people need to use other coping strategies and really beef those up during those particular times. So hormones can create all sorts of interesting ramifications on ADHD. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we're going to talk about a couple of the treatment ideas, and then I understand there's a lot of questions, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about questions. So for dealing with women, one of the strategies I use all the time when I coach people would be what I call backward planning. And backward planning is something that's really helpful, say for instance, when you're doing cooking, because you'd be shocked at how many executive functioning skills cooking has. You actually have to come up with an idea of what you want ahead of time. You have to make sure you have the ingredients on hand. And then you have to make sure that you actually put the ingredients in the item that you were preparing and, put it in early enough and just go, just all the way through the whole process. So cooking is actually difficult, and that's one of the books I've been working on. Well, actually, I haven't been working on it for the past 2 years, but I started it 2 years ago, and hopefully I'll get it finished. But for instance, if you wanted to put a dinner on the table at 6 o'clock and it's going to take an hour to cook something, then that it had to be in there by 5 at the latest to be ready at 6. And then if you knew you had to cook peas, but they only cook 10 minutes, you have to know when to put those in. Or even getting out the door in time in the morning. I don't know how many people think they know how long it takes them to get showered and dressed. But if you ever run late, and I have known a couple people with ADHD who have been late, oftentimes people miscalculate how long their shower actually takes or how long it takes to get dressed. And so I have them time themselves and actually use a watch. Okay, you start now, take your shower, get dressed, and let's see how it goes. All right, Susan, you're laughing.
No, I just think it's this funny idea. You have a few people who have been late on occasion.
Yep. And so then also, like for being on time to some place, most people with ADHD, if something is at 1 o'clock, they plan to be there at 1. Whereas if anything bumps into the way, if you have to go to the bathroom or a package gets delivered or whatever, then you're automatically late. So it's usually important when you do the backward planning to add in a cushion of 10 minutes. And people that I work with often feel like they'd rather die than be 10 minutes early for something. But you can do really, really, really fun things in that 10 minutes ahead of time. You can check your email, you can read a book on your Kindle or whatever, and so you can plan, you can walk around the block, you can do some things that would be really good. But backward planning is one of the keys for success for a lot of people. And a lot of times when you backward plan something, you'll realize you might not have time to do it. So you might have to put some things on hold. A lot of women tend to think they should be able to do everything. But if you really start to look at how long things take and how much time you actually have, sometimes women have to say no to things, which is really difficult. I think we're socialized to say yes all the time. But when we actually look at the logistics, a lot of times we really can't do it. So backward planning is one of my best coaching strategies for a lot of people. We backward plan all sorts of things. And what's nice is once you backward plan something, I have people write it down, whether it's cooking a recipe so they know, whether it's going to work, going to your kid's school, write it down so then you really know. The next strategy I like a lot is the power of 2. And this is where you go back and forth between your 2 top priorities, because heaven forbid you just stay with 1. That would be boring. But when you get bored, what happens is people jump to something else, and then when they get bored with that, they jump to something else, and then something else, and then something else, and then they go far afield. So oftentimes, if you pick your top 2 priorities, your big rocks, the things that you definitely have to get done, and then when you get tired of doing it or bored or want to change, you jump over to do the other priority. And the rule with the power of 2 is you can keep jumping back and forth between those 2, But when you finish one, you have to finish the other one before you can add more, because otherwise you could keep on pushing that one rock off and off and off and off and never get it done. But a lot of people
I mean, finishing things is hard, right? I mean, I find it very difficult to finish things. Easy to start, yeah.
Yeah, and oftentimes it's because it's exciting when you start. It's new, it's novel, it lights up your brain. And when you get down towards the end, there's not as much satisfaction sometimes in doing some of the mundane details. Now, the other thing is sometimes you can outsource the back end. I had one group that I worked with that the woman was a fantastic starter and the man was unbelievably detail-oriented, and they were each trying to do individual tasks. And it's like, well, you know what? If we just switched, it's like you can do any part of this project. And I said, and she's a really good starter. I said, actually, she outstarts you. I said, but she's not a good finisher, which we know. And so let's put her in her strengths. What if she starts, and then when she starts to get bored or tired or frustrated, she hands it over to you instead of putting it down, you know, hands it over to you, and then you finish it. I said, because you actually delight in finishing. So again, if one's a good starter and one's a good finisher, you don't have to have the same rules. There's nothing that says in a lot of cases you have to start and finish. So, you know, if you're a really good starter, you might want to start. So like I've had a lot of people who are really, really good clutterers, and yet they think they should be the one to declutter everything all by their own selves. So like if you're a really good clutterer, the chances of you being a really good organizer are slim. You know, that might not be your strength, so you might want to tag team with somebody who's really good at organizing, but I bet you probably could out-create them in something else. So again, women need to spend as much time as possible in their sweet spots and not feel badly about it. All right, the last one on here under strategies was the parking lots. And if you think about a trip to the airport, they have the drop-off parking for the things that are urgent where you just drop somebody right off. And then they have short-term parking where you're going to go if you're just going to be there for a little bit and pick up somebody or drop somebody off. And then they have long-term parking. And when we think about our goals and our priorities and what we're going to do every day, it's important for you to decide what's in your drop-off, what's urgent that has to be done. And I would make that one of your power of two things. And if you have two urgent things, you know, again, you might want to put those as your power of two till you knock them off. And then your short-term ones are the things that you have to do in the near future. And then the long-term parking lot needs to be all the other wonderful ideas that you have of things you want to do. And it's amazing, especially if a woman tries to start their list of things or starts to work on something, your head is going to go swimming with a million other ideas of things. Write them down and then figure which ones do you want to put on your power of two. You know, which ones do you want to get done, cross off, or must you cross off now? And sometimes if you're having a really, really, really hard time doing that, you might want to have a body double, which is somebody standing over you or sitting with you while you do it. I almost had to have my husband do that with our taxes. They're due tomorrow. And I was really having a hard time getting the last of those papers together. So he was cute. He's like, do you want me to sit with you while you do it? And it's like, maybe. So I got it done. But I've had a number of clients where, say they wanted to clean out their closet and get it organized. They really didn't need somebody to help them. They just really didn't want to do it. But when they had a friend come over and do it with them, they were able to stay on track better. So those are just some ideas. But again, the first obstacle that women have to get over would be it's okay to get somebody to help you. Well, actually, there's a couple. You don't have to do everything that everybody says. You can say no, and you can have help. And it's okay to have help. And actually, it's smart to have help. You know, again, if you're doing something that you're not good at, the chances of you being happy are pretty slim.
Michele, do you find that women with ADHD not only have a hard time accepting getting help, but also have a hard time working with people who would help them? I mean, you know, not knowing really how to go about it or let go of some pieces, and to get help, you have to delegate pieces too.
Yeah, you have to feel comfortable with the person. It has to be the right kind of help too, because in fact, I've gotten into arguments with a number of organizers who were telling me how they were going to help all the women with ADHD organize their houses. And it's like, but no, their brain doesn't work that way. They want it by color. And they said, no, we're going to put them in files with labels. And I said, but no, they want
where they
all
will
of
stay until they die, right? Yeah.
You know, it's like, no, let's have pink files and pink tablets to go with this project, and let's have yellow ones that go with this one. And then they want to put them in a file box, which for some clients is the black hole of death. You know, and it's like, well, no, let's put stackers up. I said, a lot of the people I work with are visual, and they'll know that a paper is in the middle of the file, close to the blue paper. I said, let's work with the way their brain works to help them. So you have to make sure you have the right helper, and you have to be willing to admit that you're not perfect. Here's the trick. Everybody is not perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, those are really helpful. Michele, people are saying how helpful these little strategies are, including a man who said, these work for me too. I'm not a woman. Backward planning power of two in parking lots. That makes a lot of sense. Should I just jump in with some questions, or I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's good, because then otherwise the other treatment ideas are exercise, physical activity, and one of the biggest problems, I mean, exercise is really good for depression, anxiety, and ADHD, and a number of other things. But a lot of women don't make time for themselves to do that. They feel like it's a luxury, but it actually makes you more effective and efficient, and so does eating lunch. A lot of people work through lunch to catch up, quote unquote, but the research is pretty clear that the people who take a break, eat something, walk around the block, whatever, and come back actually outperform the people who sat at their desk all day long. So if you want to be effective and efficient, you really need to exercise, and you really need to take breaks for lunch. And again, that's difficult for many women to do. And medication can make a big difference. And a lot of women also don't go for optimal medication regime. If something's a little bit better, they tend to stop. And so, you know, I'd encourage you to be assertive and say, well, let's try the next dose, or let's try and see if something else could be better. Because you never know, and you always can go back to what you were on. You know, and if the doctor said, well, we're going to treat you for depression first, you know, it's like, but, you know, I'm depressed because I'm not doing stuff. You know, could we go back? So again, just be assertive with taking control of your treatment, because nobody's going to be more impacted and nobody's going to care more about you than you. So that's going to be really important. All right, so let's rip some questions, Susan.
That's great. Can we just dial all the way back? A couple of people, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this question, but are really wondering why, do we know why women are more likely to have inattentive ADD? Do we know what the gender difference is about? I'm not sure we do, really. I mean, the biology of it, I guess. You know.
Well, that's actually quite an interesting area of ADHD research, and Stephen Henshaw has done an awful lot in that area. And it's possible that women actually have the same amount of ADHD as men, and it's just that it looks in a different form, so it hasn't been picked up, so there could be equal pieces. Right. And personally, this is going to be the next frontier, and we're not there yet, but the inattentive guys, I think there's a whole groundswell. I mean, we're working on the women and girls with ADHD, but I've seen an awful lot of the inattentive guys who don't get picked up, too.
I'm sure that's true, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it really comes down to, there's a question that someone asks is, you know, if you don't have the H, the hyperactivity, I guess 2 points. I mean, you sort of raised, and I've heard this before, that maybe the H is there, but it's just under behaving differently. It's maybe twitching or doodling, or maybe the H isn't. So maybe there isn't such a big difference between these two. I guess that's one question or point. And also then, is the treatment different? People are asking that. You know, if women are more likely to have inattentive rather than hyperactive, is that salient from a treatment perspective?
Not really.
Right. Okay.
So, you know, and I'm not sure that women have. Yeah, as I said, we're on the frontier of this one. I'm not sure that women have a genetic difference that makes them more susceptible to inattentive ADHD. I think that's where Stephen Henshaw is now thinking, would be that there's something genetically different that causes that. So that one's going to be a stay tuned for. So right now, Yeah, so right now we just know that women have a lot of the undiagnosed ADHD and attentive type, and girls too. And we know there's profound ramifications. From a treatment strategy, oftentimes it's very similar. So it's not that if you're inattentive you use this medicine and if you're hyperactive you use this one, because it's actually still the prefrontal cortex, the executive functioning skill part that's not working effectively and efficiently. And once it's restored to normal functioning, usually you're much better.
Right.
So it's not a lot different. There are some different strategies for dealing with impulsivity. So there'll be strategies for some of the specific behavioral differences. But the treatment course is actually quite similar. I know the population wanted to have it be ADD and ADHD, which I thought made perfect sense, but when they did the DSM, they didn't pull it out that way. So I know the fact that they're both lumped together confuses the heck out of folks.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah. People keep saying to us, why are you talking about ADHD? I have ADD, but ADHD has just become the generic term for all of it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, they have that backslash. In fact, I made a cartoon in my book. Yeah, it's officially AD/HD, which is, and then there's 3 types: the inattentive type, the hyperactive type, and then the combined type. It just is so confusing.
I know. You mentioned screeners. A lot of interest here in screeners. Are there specific screeners for women? Is there a screener that you recommend? It seems to be, it really makes sense in keeping with your recommendation that women take control of their own situation. The idea of taking a screener, printing it out, and taking it to the doctor sounds like a really good suggestion to me.
Yeah, so right now, luckily, with the new DSM that they just came out with, the DSM-5, they actually include a lot of symptoms for inattentive women and in the current language now. So any of the newer screeners tend to have language that's good. I think, is it WebMD has a screener, Health Central has a screener. For women and girls, I know Patricia Quinn has a screener for women and girls, and so does Sari Solden. So those are the
And we actually have both of those screeners, both Sari Solden's and Pat Quinn's, on attitudemag.com actually, and if you go to Symptoms and Diagnosis, the channel on our website, you'll find them there. So yeah, and you can print them out at the end.
Maybe they should just go to your website.
Either way, I mean, both of the Pat Quinn and Sari have great websites too, so whatever. But yeah, I do think it's a really helpful way to go.
Well, and it also helps guide the discussion with the physician or your, whoever's helping you.
Right, absolutely, right. In terms of the type of, here's what I was trying to say. Is there ever been a screener written of questions to ask a professional to determine whether or not they can really be helpful with ADHD?
Actually, believe it or not, my first book, Adult ADD, that's now Adult ADHD, I had a screener for your doctors.
Ooh, Michele, that's a great. That would be great.
Maybe we should revive
We should.
it.
Yeah. I think that would be so helpful to people, because what do you ask to see if the person, as someone posted here, everyone says they're good at ADHD.
Well, no. What the difference would be? I asked them to ask at the office, 1, do they treat ADHD? And then sometimes they go, well, of course they treat all sorts of things. The most important question is, how many people do they tend to treat a week or a month with ADHD?
That's a good specific question.
Yeah, because if they say like 2 or 1 or I don't know, or approximately what percentage of your population is ADHD. So that's an important differential. And then also, if you talk to people, in fact, I just pulled out my book. It was on my shelf. I had things like, oh, no, that was the screener for people. All right, I'll have to find the other one. But I know I had one for the doctor, but it was definitely how many people do you treat. And then also I ask if medication is an option on the table. And not that you want to do medication, because you might not want to use medication, or you might not be ready for medication. But the important part is I don't want to have anybody who takes things off the table. And I also ask, what if they also are amenable to alternative and complementary treatments. And if they say no, I'm not going to want to go there either.
Right. So you want an open experience, an open-minded person in general. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
again, if you look on the websites now, because everything's on websites now pretty much, you can see what they say. So if they say they specialize in 30 things and ADHD is one of the 30 things they have listed, I'd be concerned because nobody specializes in 30 things. You know, if they say they specialize in 4 or 5 things and ADHD is one of them, that's a pretty good sign.
Right.
If they talk about ADHD on their website, that's a pretty good sign. So again, those would be some ideas. Or if you go to a
Okay.
CHAD meeting or someplace, people tend to talk and they can pass on referrals. But I
Right.
do have people question the docs or in the mental health professionals before they get in there.
Um, about diagnosis, we have I don't know, 5 to 6 people on the webinar who said, you know, that they were only recently diagnosed at age 35, in one case in their 60s, and they're filled with, you know, anger and, you know, complicated feelings. How could this have gone on this long? What if I'd known sooner? I mean, why is it so hard for women to get diagnosed?
Well, I think we've talked, well, you know,
Yeah, we
again,
have
if you
talked
go,
about that.
you know, and if you go back to when I first started in the field, you know, after you were 15, you outgrew ADHD.
So no one
You know,
believed it existed. Right, right.
you know, because adults didn't have it. It was a childhood disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, then you had the fact that the most common type was the hyperactive impulsive type. And again, most clinicians diagnose based on we call it the DSM, the diagnostic manual. And that's, you know, you're supposed to have these symptoms. And if we look at the initial symptoms, they were the hyperactive 8-year-old boy symptoms. And girls didn't look like that. So my
Right.
son with hyperactivity looked like that. But, you know, other people don't look like that. And so it often didn't fit the diagnostic criteria. So early on in my career, I was going way off the DSM and, you know, diagnosing people with ADHD, you know, not otherwise specified because they didn't meet the traditional criteria. Actually, this is just a cute aside. Stephen Copps actually almost had his medical license under review for prescribing outside his field because he was one of the first people, he was a pediatrician and he was treating adults with ADHD wonderfully, and he was writing the first book on medication management. But yeah, I had to write a letter to him when I was president of ADA saying that no, he's definitely a pioneer in the field. He's
Right.
not
Don't
outside
take
his
away
area
his
of
license.
expertise. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's creating the field of expertise. So I think, you know, if you look back, people didn't know. In fact,
Right.
if you even survey people now, a lot of the school teachers, you know, if they don't see the traditional ADHD, they tend to think that, oh, they're just making it up. They just want special treatment or, you know, everybody has ADHD now. So again, there's a lot of scoffing, which is why we have things like Awareness Day, and I know you guys do a great job with your myths and things because people still have a hard time sometimes believing it exists, believing that it's serious. A lot of times people don't get treated. It's like, well, it's not that bad. Well, it actually is that bad. The suicide
Right.
rate is higher for girls and women with ADHD than the general population by, I think it was like 20% higher. I mean, it's big.
Wow. Is that partly the comorbid anxiety and depression? A lot of questions about that topic as well. How do we get diagnosed? How do you distinguish between anxiety, depression, and ADHD? And if you get diagnosed with both, can you treat them both? I mean, I guess that's also a question people are asking.
Okay, yeah, the thinking used to be that you would treat the anxiety or depression first, and then if there was underlying ADHD, you'd go for that. I hate that approach, and most of the people I work with are now flipping because if you're anxious because you're afraid you might forget your kids, or if you're anxious because you think you might leave a pot on the stove and start a fire, but you do, then you've got a problem. And dealing with your anxiety isn't going to help a lot because you have a real logistical problem. So the first thing I would really encourage people to do is check out, you know, are you depressed because you don't have friends, and do you not have friends because you forget everybody's birthday and you interrupt all the time and you're late? So if those are the reasons that you're depressed, you know, being on an antidepressant isn't going to help. But figuring out strategies to remember birthdays and to get yourself there on time and strategies to not interrupt are going to help much more than being on an antidepressant. So I think you have to do both, but to answer your question, yes, if you wanted to be on meds and your doctor needed you to be on meds, you can be on meds for both. You just don't do it at the same time. You just change
Okay.
one treatment variable at a time. So if you're on an antidepressant and the doctor feels that you need to be on an antidepressant, and then when you talk to the doctor, in all likelihood, they're going to suggest that after you're stable for a bit, then we're going to add the ADHD meds, but not take something away. Because if you change up too many things, then you don't know what's causing what.
Right, right. Can you talk to the underlying hormonal complications? Questions about sort of not only menopause, but also just the connection between ADHD symptoms and menstrual cycles. What's the hypothesis here? Is it estrogen that's making the brain work better? That's what I've always imagined, but
I'm not sure. That's not one of my real specific areas that I look
okay.
into. I just know that the fluctuating hormonal cycle can create havoc with ADHD.
Okay.
So that would be important for them to check out. And I know that it's helpful if you keep good records that you can bring to your professional. And a lot of gynecologists are getting pretty good at this point now too. And if you can sort of show them that, you know, premenstrual cycle, you're great, and then you're bad after this. But again, hormonal cycles definitely impact, I'm sure that it impacts all sorts of receptors and things, but there's others better than I to answer that. But definitely go on Pat Quinn's website, and she has piles of information on that. She probably wrote articles for you on attitude, too.
She did. She did. Yeah. I think, you know, it's just basically, yeah, the synapses in the brain are facilitated by estrogen and other hormones that women have, and so, you know, as they ebb and flow, it's definitely, you know, a problem. We have a couple of really nice husbands on this webinar who would say, you know, they're married to women with ADHD. It's very difficult in many ways, and they'd really like to know how to best help. What can they best do to be supportive?
So one thing would be to make sure that their partner is as effectively managed as possible, you know, whether that's getting them on medication, getting them off medications, getting their medications adjusted, having them work with some coaching strategies. So again, if their ADHD is well managed, that's going to make life a whole lot better. In addition to that, I want to go back to see what your partner's, what are your wife's strengths? What is she really good at? And see how much of the time you can have her in her sweet spot. And then what are the things that she's not so good at? And maybe those are things you can switch. Like it could be that the woman is great at, you know, hanging up pictures and taking out trash and, you know, doing things that might typically be deemed to be male things. And the woman might hate cooking because of all the pieces. And the guy might think that's no big deal. Or you might agree to eat out a couple times a week to take some of the pressure off. So the important part is going to be to openly and honestly look at where is ADHD impacting, and are there things that she can do to better manage it? Because again, you know, it's an explanation, not an excuse. It's what you've got. You have to figure out ways to manage it. And so do that as well as you can, and then figure out together as a team, what can we do? There's also some good books. I know Gina Pera wrote the You, Me, or ADD, like that ADD roller coaster book. But again, if the husbands understand ADHD, a lot of people take ADHD personal. You know, say they plan a nice romantic dinner and the wife shows up 40 minutes late. You know, what the natural thing is you don't really love me. If you loved me, you'd be here. Well, that's not necessarily true with ADHD, because with ADHD, they could love you so much that they were making a card for you, and then they went to the store to find different paper and designs, and then when they were there, they saw something else. And so off they go, and here what started as a really good intention can end up with them being late for something that's really special. So I think not blaming it on a moral defect and not blaming it on them not loving you or doing it on purpose. Oh, the other thing that really frustrates people is the fluctuating nature of ADHD. People with ADHD aren't deficient in attention 100% of the time. Sometimes they can pay attention, especially if it's something they love or enjoy, because that lights up their brain, that changes the brain physiology, and they actually can pay attention better to things that they enjoy. And that drives people crazy when they see that, because they think they're doing it on purpose. So I think the more you can educate yourself about ADHD and understand that it's physiological, it's brain-based. We actually know there's genes involved. We know there's neurotransmitters, receptors involved. I mean, it's real, it's physical, just like a broken arm. But you can imagine how freaked out people would be if you had a cast on and then you took it off and were playing baseball and then you put your cast back on. And just as you pleased, you sort of seem to come and go. And that's what happens with people in their ADD brain. So educate themselves a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just key. It's so easy to be blamed. And one of the things that people with ADHD, and a couple of people have posted that here as well, is they're tremendously sensitive. And a couple of people are asking whether this is specifically women with ADHD, this sort of extreme sensitivity to hurt or to being blamed or just generally feeling shamed by their condition.
Well, I think women are good at shame anyhow. And I think we tend to internalize that. But also, if you were right-handed and for some reason you no longer could use your right hand, you'd get pretty good at using your left hand. And what happens with ADHD is details and linear thinking is not usually very strong. That's why it's a deficit. So what happens is people rely on other things that work well for them. And usually that leads more into the emotion, sensitivity, intuition part. And for instance, when I was teaching grad school, I had a blind student in my class for counseling. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, how can he ever counsel people? Because so much of what I rely on is body language. I watch people's faces and their shifts and things like that. And he said, but I hear them sigh. I hear the change of their breath pattern. He's like, I hear things that you don't hear, because you didn't have to. So I think a lot of women rely on emotions and intuition more. And I think a lot of people get beat up. I mean, the research is overwhelming that many of the girls and women with ADHD who aren't treated really do struggle with depression and anxiety. There's all these expectations to look right and be right, and if you don't match up, you're going to really blame yourself. And women in general, we have to be perfect. That was sort of what we're supposed to do, and we're supposed to do it all ourselves, and we're not supposed to say no. So it goes back to this whole society expectation. So shame is huge, and Sari Solden's written some real nice stuff on shame and ADHD.
She has, yeah. Mm-hmm. Here's poor Michele, who says, what happens if you're married to a husband who says, if you just loved me, you would keep the house clean and organized? She said he might have OCD, as all three of his brothers have it, and he even color codes his socks. Oh, Michele, sorry.
Actually, I had a couple like that I worked with. And that's where, maybe going to see a counselor who understands ADHD can help them. To figure out some strategies together, but also to explain that it's not a matter of if you love me enough. It's like, if my brain were wired differently, I could do that. But if you're living with somebody who's OCD, they really need the house to be cleaned up, and you really are probably not the best to do it. So this might be hiring somebody to clean the house once a week, and if you have to, give up something else or whatever, if it's really that important to him, or that might be something that he does, because that might be important to him. And you can train yourself, like once items have homes, and once you know where things go, and if you can have less things, you might really be able to work with a coach, say, in how do I streamline the house so that I can keep it neat and clean. And there are ways to do that. And usually it starts with decluttering and getting rid of a lot of the stuff, but then also identifying where things belong. A lot of the things that lay around are things that we don't have homes for yet. And so if we don't have a home for something, it like wanders, and then it grows. So again, if you know that your pocketbook always goes on the bottom of a closet, so then when you come in, you might need a mantra. Closet, 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 until you get there and put it down. I had one client who wanted to put stuff away, and his mantra was, do it now or there's hell to pay.
That's cute.
So again, there's all sorts of strategies to help you do some things, but I think it needs to start with him understanding this is physical. It's not a test of your love.
Right.
And they might need a professional to help them get there.
Yeah. Deborah has written, my 3 teenagers have been diagnosed as ADD, and the more I learn about it, I'm pretty sure my husband and I both have it also. You can probably imagine how disorganized, cluttered, and chronically late our household is. It's extremely stressful. Are there clinicians out there who work with the whole family? She said, you know, I'm looking for help beyond the psychiatrist who prescribes the meds for the kids. Would that be a coach then?
It could be a coach or it could be a psychologist. I know right now I started with one person coaching and I now have the whole family, so that doesn't become uncommon.
Right.
So yeah, a coach definitely can work with everybody on strategies. Because again, I have a situation that I'm just working with you where, you know, one person does something which sets off somebody else, and we really need people to come up with some different ways to manage. But yeah, family systems would be really important. And that would be an area of checking, you know, and again, it doesn't have to be done in person, which is nice. So find a coach who works with whole families, or there might be a therapist who works with families and who is familiar with ADHD strategies. But yeah, I think it's important to work with the whole family in a case like that. I've had a couple cases. Now, the one thing that's good with a situation like that, and that maybe it's true for her too, is usually there's not a lot of shame. The one family I had where both parents had it and the kids, they said, you know, I hear you talking about all the shame and the blame. She said, well, we don't have that.
It's our whole family, right? That's great. Yeah. Oh, it was a great comment from Melody. She says, when I'm trying to declutter, I pick up an object and I say to myself, where would a normal person put this? She said, I don't have an answer because most normal people wouldn't have what I have. So yeah, that's, you know, I think a lot of us have that feeling about all this stuff. You know, a request for you to review and spend a little more time on the parking lot theory. Just explain again how it works.
Well, it's also similar to the 4-box system of how high a priority is it and how urgent is it. So if something is urgent but not important, it wouldn't be one of our power of 2 things. Like if a coupon's going to expire, you know, the world will not end. But if you're taking your kid to a pediatrician and he needed you to get something to bring before you went that afternoon, that would make it into your urgent parking lot. It has to be done now. And also when you make your parking lots, because people need a place to put their ideas, because if you don't write them down and capture them somehow, your brain's going to keep on popping it up, and that could be devastating. So write down all the things that you want to do. Some people use whiteboards. Some people use a computer. Some people use their phone. Whatever system works for you, write down the things that you have to do and that you want to do, and then prioritize them by, you know, if the plane were taking off in 35 minutes, which would I need to get done first? You know, and then if I had to get it done by the end of the day or the end of the week, what are those things? And then if there's things I want to do someday, you know, those get put on your parking lot to do later. And then, you know, again, when I coach people, we talk in more detail about some of the steps, because also you don't put the whole item on your list. You put the step that you're going to do on your list. Because, like, say, for instance, taxes. You know, if you just put due taxes on your list, oh my gosh, you know, it could be an overwhelming process that would never come off. But if you said gather medical records for the year, you know, that's a piece of the project that you could get done. And so that's doable, that's small enough not to be too scary, and it's manageable. I'm trying to think where I wrote up. I think I have an article I wrote for you, an attitude on the parking lots.
Really? All right, I'll look for that.
Yeah,
And yeah,
I think I did.
That's a great theory. Can we talk about friendship issues? There's some very sad, you know, people who are posting on the webinar about, you know, difficulty retaining friends. Sarah says, you know, I've had a lot of trouble with keeping friends over time. I feel like they just get tired of me. I'm overly affectionate, and another person says, and my daughter just talks nonstop. We can't get her to stop, and it's really off-putting to people. I know you've written a whole book on this topic, but so it may be hard just to come up with a few resources, but any thoughts on the friendship issue? Because it is very lonely, you know, for people.
Well, I mean, it's in my whole career, the thing that broke my heart more than anything is when our phone wasn't ringing and nobody wanted to play with my son.
Right.
Um, you know, I mean, him not doing well academically was one thing, but when he didn't have friends and he wasn't invited, oh my gosh, you talk about a heartbreak. And
Absolutely.
when
Yeah.
I was in the field back then too, they told me that you couldn't teach people with ADHD social skills. And it's like, wait a minute, I worked with people with mental retardation back in the day and I could teach them social skills. You
Right,
know,
right.
you have to be able to do something. The most important thing is to know what you're doing wrong. And I have that Novotni social skills checklist. It's on my website. It's on a lot of places. And it's also in the book, where you have to know what they're doing wrong. Like the person, for instance, who knows their daughter talks too much.
Mm-hmm.
The important part would be, you know, maybe to try some of the strategies for not talking so much. And some quick ones would be things like asking the other person 2 questions before you start so that at least you look like you're having the give and take. Also, if you put your tongue on the top of your mouth, behind your front teeth, it actually slows you down a bit.
Wow.
I've had people. That's where the hold your tongue comes from. It actually does physiologically slow you down. I've had people put little vibrating phones or watches on and like have it set for every minute, and if they're still talking when it goes off, they have to like throw the ball and ask somebody else a question. So again, there's some ways to train them, and if that's not working, then they might actually need medication to help them because again, ADHD is physiologically based. So again, we can control it to an extent, but they might need some medication management. Or the other thing might be some physical activity before they go to socialize. I had one guy that used to run around the house 5 times, you know, and that just helped him settle down some beforehand. But social problems are huge. And a lot of the people who, you know, get into serious depression and things like that are because of social relationships. And unfortunately, women and girls have different requirements for socializing than guys. Guys can go out and parallel play and it's fine, whether they're 10 or whether they're 50 and playing golf or watching a game. They can sit beside each other and not talk and they've socialized. Girls, if you don't notice that I got my hair cut, it's like you must not love me. And didn't you notice I got new shoes? And, you know, so like if you don't notice some of the nuances, it's interpreted as a social failure because you weren't really paying attention to them. Or again, if you miss a guy's birthday and you're a guy, it's no big deal. If you're a female and you miss somebody's birthday, you know, it's like awful. So the first thing would be to find out what it is you do, and then work with somebody, or again, the what does everybody else know that I don't has a lot of strategies in it. And, you know, work and figure out, can you do some strategies? And if you can't do some strategies, you know, then you might want to work with a professional in more detail. I actually had people that I used to trail. I used to go out with them to a social situation and just sort of be near them and watch them. It's like, yeah, I can see what you're doing if they don't know.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so again, it's important to know what you're doing, and again, to really work on
strategies. It sounds like if you don't
strategies.
know what you're working on, it's almost, it'd be very difficult to change things, right? I mean,
Yeah, because in fact, like Jared used to talk too much all the time, and even when he was on medication, it still didn't help him. That was just an area that he really struggled in. So what we did with him is say to the other person, look, I have ADHD. Sometimes I talk too much. If I'm talking too much, just tell me to shut up, and I will. And I told Jared, the rule with that is, and then when they tell you, even if you think you're not, you have to shut up at that point in time.
right.
But once he put it out there that he knows it's a problem, he doesn't want to do it, he doesn't intend to do it, then you take away that whole moral thing about it. And people would tell him to shut up sometimes. They're like, Jared? He's like, am I talking too much? They go, yep. And then sometimes he would go, really? And if I was nearby, I'd give him the evil eye.
You bet. Too much talking, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But so again, and sometimes that's another strategy is if somebody will cue you, you know, to let you know. I've had people in business meetings, you know, ask somebody to watch them and see what they're doing, or, you know, to give them feedback. Because you have to know what you're doing, and you have to know when you're doing it so that you can stop.
Right.
And then there's always medication, which helps give you that moment to think first oftentimes.
Yeah. Michele, this has been so interesting and so helpful. We're out of time. Do you have any last thoughts for the women and the few men who are dialed in to this webinar?
Well, fortunately, I mean, ADHD is real. ADHD in women is, I think, our next frontier that's finally getting recognized. There's going to be some blips in the system as people try to figure things out. But for any of you out there, I think be persistent. If what you're doing isn't working, find somebody else to help you. You know, find some other strategies, because ADHD can be managed. You know, and if it's ADHD and something else, that's okay. That can be managed too. But make sure you have people on your team who are really good at helping you. And if they're not, you might have to go someplace else. Again, with today's world, with people being coached from people all over the world, you're not limited by where you live to get help anymore. And there's lots of good books, lots of good material. But be persistent. And for women, it's like be assertive and really speak up if you're not being well taken care of, because you're important. And I think the world needs your ideas, your passion, your insight. And you don't have to be Superwoman.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. And go out and be assertive, be persistent. Thanks, everyone.